Wow. Okay, Chris, are you ready? Cool. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy Co-op 101. This is a part of a two-part series, the next being our conversion webinar happening 1 week from today. But this is first and foremost all about co-ops. So we're going to be covering the breadth of different styles and formations of cooperatives today, everything from producer to worker, but we're going to really narrow down and focus in on worker co-ops as a tool for systems change and as a tool for the sort of change that we want to see in the world. I'm going to start by introducing BRED itself. So we are actually a cooperative loan fund here in Baltimore City. We're a CDFI, which is a community development financial institution. Basically, we're a nonprofit loan fund that helps cooperatives, social enterprises, and other mission-aligned businesses get funding, access to the capital that they need to grow and evolve. Our mission really looks at centering both democratic control and moving to a more equitable economy. And so when we look at providing capital and when we look at providing loan financing to different projects, we do both a values and mission alignment screen as well as a financial analysis and understanding how that project can benefit the city. We are located in Baltimore, but we operate across Maryland, and we're part of a national network called the Seed Commons Loan Fund. And really that is, again, a CDFI that looks at multiple cities. I think at this point, there's maybe 20 peers, Christa? There might be even more at this point.
26.
So we're 26, there we go. So we're a national loan fund, and we are the Maryland branch. Awesome. So, your presenters are part of a team. And so this is the Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Development team, seasoned cooperators. And one of the sort of unique differentiators with what we are, or what we do is that almost everybody everybody, I should say, on the team is either a previous worker owner or a current worker owner at a worker cooperative in Maryland. So, this is coming from not only just a financier, but also lived experience and understanding what it's like to be in the trenches with everybody, as a lender. My name is Joseph Cureton. My background is really in cooperatives, but more so than that, actually in technology. So I come to this really from a pretty, non-cooperative background from the tech sector, and I call myself a recovering tech bro. Basically, I woke up one day and understood sort of what my work was going towards and really felt like it wasn't aligned with my values and wanted to find work that was. And so cooperatives were really a draw for me personally. And now I'm part of a worker cooperative called Obron here in the city. We do leverage buyouts of small middle market, lower middle market firms. And really what that looks at is allowing every worker to be part of a holding cooperative. So it's a little bit of a unique structure, but really the end result is conversion through an acquisition process. I work as a project officer at BRED, and really start to talk about our public programming and sort of some of the technology that we're going to get into a little bit here after the presentation. And I am joined today by Christa Daring. Christa?
Hi, my name is Christa, they, them, theirs pronouns. I am from Baltimore originally. I live less than a mile from where my parents live, and I grew up in Northeast Baltimore. I am the newest project officer at BRED, although I was at Red Emma's for 7 years, and I also spent some time at Thread Coffee. Most recently, I was the executive director of Swap USA, which is a national human rights organization focused on sex workers and those in the street economy. I would say that like different governance is definitely my my nerd spot, and my happy place is like figuring out how to make decisions in a way that is good, healthy, fun conflict. Maybe not fun conflict, but productive conflict. Spend a lot of time outside. I get to watch my chickens out of my office window. It's very cute.
There we go. Well, when we're talking about co-ops, we really want to start from the very beginning, and we're just going to dig right in. So today's presentation is going to kind of have 3 different sections. So first section is going to really talk about like what a co-op is and just the most basic fundamental, this is what a co-op is and does. And then we're going to talk about the different types of cooperatives. So again, everything from a producer cooperative down to a worker cooperative. And we're going to end with what we think is a pretty rad tool, the worker cooperative, and how that could actually be structured. More than anything today, we hope that you get a couple of things. Some key sort of objectives that we have is, one, we hope to demystify the sort of cooperative structure and really try and make sure that you get the fundamentals, right? Then the second piece is, within worker cooperative specifically, we hope to give a wide range of options for you to understand and carry forth after the meeting, to really understand that it's flexible and that it's a structure that you can play with. So ultimately, we hope to empower you to use some of the tools that we've put together as well. And so we'll talk about those at the very end of the presentation. But really, those tools are to help you either start up or enrich your current worker cooperative or cooperative enterprise, and to get loan ready also, and to see about financing and really getting the steps together to get financing for your project. So with that, we're going to start with with the most basic question: what is a co-op? And at the most fundamental, at the sort of root of it all, it doesn't matter what type of co-op, there's kind of two attributes that you really need to think about whenever you're thinking about forming a cooperative. And really, a co-op is just a structure, just like any other structure, a nonprofit, for-profit, government agency. Like, it's just a way of organizing work, or a way of organizing activities in a business, in a cooperative that has shared ownership and democratic control. So co-ops, unlike other businesses, have the most shared ownership and most democratic control for their members. And so I want to be very clear here that members do not have to solely be one group. However, most of the time they are one pretty homogeneous group of stakeholders that look at, again, shared ownership, which is the financial return of the business and control, as well as democratic decision making, which again is governance and how the business operates. And so a cooperative sits at that very top right section of the shared ownership and decision making. And when we go through the models of some of the different types of worker cooperatives, I'm going to key in on one specific example of hiring or firing as a way that you can think about how shared ownership and democratic control manifests or comes to be in a worker cooperative context. But with that basic understanding that it's a membership organization that has, again, shared ownership and democratic control at the center of it, there's one other key feature or attribute of a cooperative. It's the fact that those members, that each one of those individual members has one vote. So instead of voting by the amount of capital that you put in, or instead of voting by some other means of assessing your power in an organization, a co-op is always one member, one vote. And really, again, that looks at everything from, it can show up in the election cycle. And most cooperatives run democratic elections, and they do it in a way of one member, one vote. Or when we're looking at distribution of patronage, or what we call surplus capital, that again is looking at how you can equitably distribute that profit, that end surplus at the end of the year, based on your membership, based on the amount of time or in a worker co-op, or the amount of purchasing in a purchasing co-op. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. But the most basic premise here is a worker or a producer or any other type of co-op, they have members, and those members have one vote each, and that's it. And again, when we're talking about all these different types of co-ops, we're going to really nail sort of into the worker cooperative example for this. But just to let you know, like, there are so many various types of cooperatives out there in the world, and you're probably a part of some and maybe not even know it, right? So ultimately, what I'd like to do now is really dig into why. Like, why does any of this matter? Why would we even be talking about co-ops as a tool? And Christa, want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that especially if you are new to this, it can seem kind of daunting. Like, starting your own business is in and of itself a hard thing to do. So why would you go the extra mile and make it even more complex and work with other people? There's some very good reasons. You could do the next slide, Joseph. reason why we do this work is that we know that building businesses that center the needs of workers are actually more productive than more traditional businesses. When everyone is operating as if they own the business, there is going to be much better results. You're going to see a lot less loss. You're going to see a lot more buy-in because folks actually get to determine the conditions of their working environment. And a lot of what we try to do, and you'll hear is if you spend any amount of time with anyone at BRED or everyone else in co-op world, is the co-op ecosystem. This is something that we go on and about. And here, the idea is that by increasing the overall population of cooperatives, we can actually start to change the way business is done. And that in doing that, we can raise the conditions of all workers and actually change the face of, commerce as we would otherwise see it. And when workers are able to directly participate in decisions that affect their workplace, we see an overall, increase in, again, the quality of the work and the communities that they are in and that they're impacting. When people actually feel like stewards of a space and aren't being dictated to by a boss who's basically just extracting value from them, we get to see a whole change in communities and economic justice more broadly. So we're going to go through a couple different kinds of cooperatives here. Another saying that you'll hear a lot in co-op land is if you've seen one co-op, you've seen one co-op. They are cooperatives in themselves are, just a way of doing business. They're another way of doing business, and there are some standards that we're going to go through, but they're all pretty different, just even in the same sector. So there are best practices around various kinds of structures, but it would be impossible to determine exactly how many types there are. The bottom line is that a cooperative is a jointly owned venture or enterprise or association, and then it's run democratically. So in terms of producer co-ops, in the United States, about 40% of all of our agricultural goods, whether that be produce, dairy, et cetera, goes through some sort of producer co-op. And here you will see Organic Valley. Land O'Lakes is another one. Cabot Creamery, which is my favorite sort of like mass-produced cheddar, is also part of one of these. If you like really sharp cheddar at not exorbitant prices, I recommend it. But what we are able to see here is that traditional distributors of agricultural goods will actually pit different farmers together against each other to try to get the lowest prices. It's pretty amazing that we have such cheap produce in the United States, and in some ways that's really good, but in part is because the market has been artificially deflated by essentially this competition amongst farmers. So what producer co-ops allow farmers to do is to come together under the same branding. Like Organic Valley is not one farm, it is many farms that are part of the same producer co-op, and those farms are considered the member of the cooperative. As Joseph was saying, with the one member, one vote, each farm in that case is a member. And this actually allows them to save significant costs, both in marketing and distribution, and it allows them to pay their workers more and to treat the animals that produce these goods more humanely, which is, of course, is something that we all want. Next slide, please. Sort of similar to the producers co-op, we have a purchasing and marketing cooperatives. You'll see some aspects of that, especially in agriculture as well, which is that members of a purchasing and marketing cooperative can jointly buy things that they can get at a lower price. If you're familiar with Ace Hardware, the one in Waverly is a good example. These are independently owned stores. They are not owned by one person, and then each store is able to work together to buy their inventory, figure out what they're going to need, and again, reduces that amount of competition between stores. Two Ace Hardwares are less in competition than, say, two other hardware stores. Business itself, each individual Ace Hardware is, or other ones like this, are members of that purchasing cooperative. There's only one Ace that I know of that is also a worker cooperative in Maine. It would be great, to see that go across, but you can see that there's like sort of different classes of cooperatives, and that membership can mean something very different. Next, please. Housing cooperatives. We in Baltimore have Reservoir Mutual Homes, which was a great example of folks coming together and buying the building from the owner. That they were all leased tenants, and now they own that building together. They form a board, which most cooperatives have some sort of board, and then they are able to determine, what are we going to fix this quarter? Are we going to expand in any way? Are we going to upgrade any of our systems? And in this particular case, I'm not entirely sure how many tenants there are, but what you'll see is that sort of when you get to a certain scale, you might not just have like every single tenant is a member of that board. It might be just the household. It could be that there are certain sections of a home or of like property that are represented by different individuals, and that is still their one vote. You also might have noticed that like when you're looking at condos, they'll say that they are a co-op, which I think is like a pretty appropriative way of talking about condos, but it's really coming out of that idea. Housing cooperatives have existed for a long time. Next slide, please. Consumer co-ops. You might have been to a cooperative grocery store before, the Catonsville Cooperative Market. They actually started as a buying club, which is pretty common for cooperative grocery stores. And the difference there is that in a buying club, individuals or a group of families will basically just come together to focus on buying food in bulk and then distributing amongst themselves for a lower cost. They're determining, what they're going to buy so that they get that mutual benefit of a lower cost. When you actually scale it up, people will try to move into cooperative groceries. And so each member, say you are a member of a grocery co-op, and so you shop there, you get a discounted price when you're there. But that does not necessarily mean that the workers are part of a worker cooperative. They are in some cases, but that is not universally true. But you get that access to that discount as a member. REI is another example of this. If you are a member of REI, you probably get that like check once a year for like 85 cents. And it's like, it's your member dividend, which is not terribly significant, but they are still operating in the same consumer co-op way, which is that you as the consumer are the member. Financial co-ops. Some of you might bank at CQ or MEQ, which are two local credit unions to Baltimore. And they are technically financial cooperatives. You'll see in a lot of their promotional materials, they talk about you as a member, and that's actually literally true in this case. As of 2020, there were over 120 million members of credit unions in the United States. So if you're ever, talking to a friend or family member who's a little scared of that, of the socialism of cooperatives, you can be like, hey, what about your credit union? There's a huge number of people in the United States that do engage with them and do so fairly apolitically, which is great. Last, but certainly not least, worker cooperatives. We work with a number of different cooperatives, but certainly worker cooperatives are some of our favorites, and many of us have been or are members of worker cooperatives. They can exist in any industry, really anywhere that there are people doing a job, you can have a worker cooperative there. The purpose in worker cooperatives is to increase worker power, democracy, and participation. As we brought up earlier, one thing that I think is good to note in worker cooperatives in particular is shared capital. While, as Joseph said, the amount that you invest does not give you more votes or more control over the equity of a company, but worker cooperatives typically have some sort of, to my knowledge, universally have some sort of equity buy-in. And that can be anywhere from $100 to $1,000 to $20,000. And that is paid in over a period of time as someone is getting used to the business, if they're being considered for ownership, and it's usually paid incrementally and over the course of several years. The idea here is that you want everybody to have a buy-in. Sorry about the helicopter noise. And that also, when there is surplus, when there's profit from the business, that can be added into your equity. You can invest in the business with your own money, both from that initial buy-in and also, as the business does well over time. The benefit, of course, of worker cooperatives is that you're able to distribute that profit internally, and that could be that there's like a piece of equipment that you use every day, and you like know it needs to be replaced. In a more traditional work environment, I've certainly had this happen. I'm like, we need to replace this. It's the end of the year, and my boss is like, yeah, it's fine. You can keep using that. There's an incredible need amongst workers to have solidarity and to have this shared interest in their business. And I think that many people would say that needs can be a vulnerability, and I think that shared needs are actually a strength, especially when it comes to negotiating your own business. So when we look at worker cooperatives, we really look at these key principles. Of course, democracy, one member, one vote. No one is getting certainly any formalized power over anyone else. Solidarity, co-ops helping other co-ops. There's that ecosystem again. We want to be able to lower costs overall and increase the community wealth that we have. Control of surplus and subordination of capital equals non-alienated labor. Just to break that down a little bit, again, the control of surplus, essentially profit, and subordination of capital. So the control of surplus is, again, the situation of like, are we going to replace this piece of equipment, or are we going to give ourselves bonuses at the end of the year? And that the subordination of capital, that like the profit in and of itself is not the most important aspect of running the business. Instead, the wellness of the workers, the happiness of the workers, the impact on the community are considered more valuable than just creating sort of infinite profit. Non-alienated labor. So you're not coming to work and having someone just essentially extract profit out of you. You actually get to see the direct result of your work and your labor, and it gets to benefit you directly. No boss, workers come first. So it's true, in a cooperative, you do not have a singular boss. Joseph will get into this a little bit, but there can be management teams. I also think in my experience in cooperatives, you can think of it as not having a boss, or you can think of it as having 15 bosses. It just sort of depends on the internal culture of that particular cooperative.
So picking up on that thread of culture, I think one of the things, and again, we're sort of nailing down into worker co-ops. So really one of the things that we really love about worker co-ops is it's a place to express some practical democracy, some like really small d decision-making practices that can change a workplace's culture for the better or for the worse, honestly. And so, I want to kind of demystify that, again, co-ops, worker co-ops specifically, aren't like the silver bullet for bad workplace cultures either, right? So the same internal conflicts arise, the same stressors from the market arise. The one big differentiator, though, is systemically and structurally, co-ops are set up just a little bit differently in order to handle these challenges. So we're going to walk through a little bit of what it looks like for you as a worker, but more so what it looks like for the structure of the organization in some different size and scales of co-ops. So we're going to start out actually with what it might look like in a really small shop, in a really small co-op of, let's say, 5 or 6 people doing a thing, right? So, we're going to use the example of a hiring decision throughout, right? So if you're in a small workplace, again, 5 or 6 people, your hiring decision is most likely going to happen by consensus, where pretty much everybody's middle name and where they went to high school and sort of what type of cat they like, right? So like at the end of the day, you probably are best suited to make those big decisions, like bringing somebody onto the team or bringing somebody into membership, because you're directly participating shoulder to shoulder with somebody in a workplace. Now, of course, those big decisions that we're talking about kind of are challenging once you get to a bit of a bigger scale, right? And so when you're looking at a bigger scale, and sorry, the example here was the first Renema shop, which was, I think 6 people or 7 people, right? And like they eventually grew, right? So they did grow into a bit of a larger shop, but we're going to use the example of CHCA, which is a 2,000 member cooperative out of New York, right? They are in home health and home care and really looking at empowering their workers to have better wages, provide better care for their community, but really with 2,000 members, they can't really do the same consensus-based decision-making that a small shop in Baltimore can, right? So this actually looks pretty much like a traditional company, if you think about it. A board of representatives, or sorry, in this case, a board of representatives, but a board sits at the sort of top of the organization, setting strategy and really trying to define what the bounds of things the leadership can and can't do. That board hires or installs management. Those management carry out those board decisions, and employees go to work every day. The big difference here is that instead of the employees not having any engagement or ability to be part of that board, the members can be both eligible to run for, actually sit on that board of representatives, as well as have some direct democracy or direct control over some of the strategy, the outcomes, and some of the big decisions, as an example, selling off major assets or going into a new market of that organization. And when we're talking about hiring, think about it as a HR department that has the ability to make a hiring decision for an employee based on the need of the business. That being said, once that member is part of that membership, once that employee becomes a member of the cooperative, being able to actually fire somebody becomes another sort of governance practice in and of itself, right? So just because you're a member of a cooperative doesn't mean that you can't be fired. You can, common misconception, it's actually, you can fire people in a worker co-op. But the structure that's in place most likely will mean that there's some, another gradient of conflict resolution that needs to happen, and really trying to make sure that people understand, what membership rights and responsibilities they have, even if they're not in employment. So, that there's also this messy middle, this really cool middle part, where you can look at multiple different types of sort of hybrid models, where you have horizontal working groups that act by consensus, that form a larger body that actually makes big strategic decisions, or representative democracy of those working groups in a larger board. So ultimately, the flexibility here in the middle part, so as an example, if you have a hiring team that is actually really defines a mandate to really make sure that all hiring happens in, really strategically and following the guidelines and values of the business, that's a way that you might form a horizontal work group to fulfill that need in the business without losing that direct democracy or control that the workplace wants and needs. So again, the flexibility here is the point, is really it's your business. You can do pretty much what you want with it, which is great and also kind of daunting, right? So really the other side of this is a reverberation of why, right? So for a business, most of the time their operations come in conflict with their values. So we see this a lot when businesses scale and when there becomes this ever increasing need for solely creating profits. What we believe in, why we think co-ops and specifically worker cooperatives are just such a cool tool, is that it's just a platform for pretty awesome values. Things like job creation and the ability to actually own your work, legitimately own like the byproduct of what you do. Have a way of direct democracy, so a way to have checks and balances with management and with leadership, and also a way to participate in setting strategy and vision for the business overall, as well as this idea around global solidarity. So as Christa mentioned, this ecosystem of cooperatives, worker cooperatives, producer cooperatives, credit unions, what have you, the idea of co-ops are kind of ingrained in the bylaws of co-ops themselves. So you look at the bylaws of a producer cooperative and you look at the bylaws of a worker cooperative, while you might have different members, the spirit of the actual organization, the values of the organization are pretty similar. The need to have democratic control, the need to have care for your community, the need to understand and not or to subordinate capital, to not put capital above the members. And really, ultimately, the business is in service of its members instead of the other way around, instead of the workers or the members being in service of the business. So ultimately, we'd love for you to also continue this journey, sort of like, this was a pretty high level overview, a sort of foundational 101. And really, we've set up a bunch of tools. So specifically things like understanding those governance decisions, hiring and firing, financing, understanding how to grow or how to access capital in a way that's values and mission aligned. They're tools that we've put together at coopjumpstart.com around things like business planning. So, a business model canvas specifically suited for a cooperative, or understanding how to get to break even. So understanding how to actually turn a profit or a surplus in your business. Just because it's a co-op, and it doesn't mean that it can't have surplus, can't have profits. It's actually good. Sustainability. So we've built a bunch of tools, and really the other side of it is this is a way for you to get involved with BRED, with actually submitting a loan intake form for a cooperative that you're starting or an enterprise that you're thinking of. So we really would love for you to check it out, coopjumpstart.com. And also, we'd love to answer any questions. So we've got plenty of time left, and really want to make sure that we dig into some Q&A here. And it can be as specific to your business or generally about cooperatives, but we want to open the floor for any and all conversation or questions that you might have on either the cooperative structure, governance, how co-ops come to be, access capital. We want to be a resource for you during this time. And feel free to click your video on or not, but please do put your questions in the chat to start, and then we can just call on folks. We got a small enough group to just call on folks as well. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other, and let's go ahead and go here. All right, so yeah, please do put your questions in the chat, or if you just want to unmute and start going for it, that's also totally fine.
Hey, I was gonna type something, but it was getting to be a long question. So we're making a pretty interesting pivot at Bonfire Media Collective here in Philly, and we're gonna start offering trainings for people on how to start your own media co-op. We don't know of many media co-ops like Bonfire, but we know of a lot of, people who fit the starving artist stereotype. And we feel as if it would be a really great service to have people centralize their work more as co-ops. And I'm wondering, what are some really favorite centralized sources of information that can be useful to us that you know of as we develop these trainings?
Shameless plug for Co-op Jumpstart. Shameless plug for Co-op Jumpstart. But the other side of it is when you say media cooperative, are you talking the trainings that you're providing are for freelancers? Help me understand a little bit there.
So we operate at Bonfire as a collective of videographers, photographers, graphic designers, and other media professionals. And in our networking, we come to understand there's lots of people who fit that similar identity, like I'm a videographer and a photographer, and et cetera. And I'm wondering about ways for other people who are in that network to also form co-ops, if that answered your question correctly.
Yeah, so I'll say one thing, and then Christa, if you have any other resource. So one piece is, there are a bunch of examples of different types of what I'll put loose brackets around what you're talking about, media cooperatives. Things like in Canada, there's a thing called Stocksy United. I'll put it in the chat too, and it's stock photographers, photos and video coming together as a cooperative that they actually sell those stock photos in together, right? So that's almost like a producers cooperative, but for media, right? Or Hudsy, which is in the Hudson Valley, which is a startup, and it really is looking at local journalism, so specifically storytelling, as again, they're grouping up individual creatives, storytellers, and then having one centralized platform in which to actually distribute that content. So there's a lot of examples of those sort of like producer-like cooperatives. There's also examples of things where, as an example, we're coming together to do shared services. And so actually the Federation of Worker Cooperatives is just coming out with a shared services backend for creatives, right? So some of the groups that you're talking about, but also other groups like journalists as well, that want to do things like invoicing or income smoothing and that side of things. So, I might, so I'll put all of those in the chat, or I'll follow up with you directly. But, think about really, I think, like where the focal point of the participation is going to be. Is it in producing stuff and selling it, under one brand? Is it in shared back office? And if that's the case, then maybe just hiring one bookkeeper for everybody is really the first part to do that. Almost like a buying club in a producer or in a consumer co-op as a way to start. Or really looking at partnering with an existing organization like U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives that already has some of those existing structures in place. Christa, if I missed anything or anything to add.
I think you nailed it.
Awesome. And Alex, I'll follow up with you directly for sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we've got some questions also in the chat here. One from Crystal Mack. Crystal. Thanks for doing the workshop. Does BRED only focus on worker-owned co-ops? I am hoping to get guidance on consumer co-op health food store. Christa, you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely work with a variety of different cooperatives. Worker cooperatives tends to be our focus, but we have certainly offered a lot of different either technical assistance, and then also have some opportunities for financing in other realms as well. If you go to the Co-op Jumpstart, you can fill out an intake and put some of that info in there. I'm on the intake team, so it's usually me who will send you an email once I just sort of gather that information, and we can set up a meeting and chat about what you're working on.
Awesome. Yeah, and I will say that BRED has also been branching out lately, more so than even before. The breadth of projects is really great, and I think I'm happy to have a health food store co-op store. That would be awesome. Curious if it's common practice for people starting co-ops together to invest with equal funds regarding personal finances and wealth, from Hannah Wolfman Arnett. Sorry. Great question. And there is, as Christa mentioned, if you've seen one co-op, you've seen one co-op. So, no. So I'll just put a flat out no there, right? That generally is actually not the norm. That the purpose and really the reasoning behind worker cooperatives aren't necessarily, or it's sort of geared towards understanding where people are coming from. So if you don't have access to family wealth, or you don't have access to disposable income, the point of a worker cooperative is that you can contribute, non-financially. As an example, deduction of wages is often the way that people actually get to that member buy-in. So let's say that you decide that you want to start the cooperative with a $10,000 member buy-in, and that may be really insurmountable for a lot of people to just pony up, right? You can structure it so that you actually just take deductions out of people's pay for the first, let's call it 2 years or whatever, before you actually get into what is your ownership stake in the worker cooperative. So, the benefit there is that it's flexible. The drawback is you don't want to overburden people as well, right? So you want to make sure that you're not also only reliant on two or one or two people to put all the capital in and take all that capital risk, and not be able to actually, and then feel like they have more financial control. And Seed Commons and BRED also does finance, and has in the past, I should say, financed membership buy-ins for people. So that is something that we would work on as well. Christa, making sure that didn't lose anything there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I am most familiar with it in terms of a deduction of wages, and when I was at Red Emma's years and years ago, my memory is that it was 50 cents an hour that would just come out of our pay, and it was then your capital account. You could borrow against it. It could then, if we had a good year, that money would increase. If we had a not so great year, some of that money might decrease, but when you leave, that money goes with you. And so in some ways, what I think is neat about it is, because it was something that I struggled with at first, coming to the business, I was do we really want to, essentially, it feels like a tax on being in a democratic organization. And I think that having gone through it for a number of years and thought more about it, that what's really important is that you want people to have an equal stake. And I think what can happen in more traditional businesses is that the person who does invest the most money feels more ownership. And if you didn't put in as much money or you don't have as much at stake, like the people who did put in more have a sort of like soft power where it's like, well, my money's on the line, your money is not. And I think with the benefit of having, equal buy-in, quote unquote, is that you can sort of flatten some of those like informal hierarchies.
Yeah, totally. And that point, Krista, about making sure that, so at the end of the year, when you have your capital account balance, that share that you buy, let's call it $1,000 or whatever it might be, that's like real value. That's not actually gonna, we're not talking about stock market trading here. We're talking about like an actual account with a balance that you own, right? And so when you do want to leave, that's cash that you take with you as well. So just making sure that like that's also a point that's pretty critical to understand about co-ops is that we're not like publicly trading co-ops. That's just like not a thing that happens. So Heidi said, for a business that I'm currently operating solo, I prefer to have partners / co-op members than employees. Any tips on how to make that move? Kristen or?
Well, we are going to be addressing it next Thursday from 2 to 3. That'll be Kate Katib and myself doing a conversions 101. But yeah, that's essentially it, is that you're converting from a maybe sole proprietorship or LLC into another form where you can have multiple owners. And sort of similar to what I was talking about with the capital accounts is like essentially that, the new entity would like buy you out in some sort of way. Again, sort of like, you're not starting, your business is not starting over, but you want to make sure that like you were compensated for the work that you put in when it was just you. Again, to make sure that like everyone's starting on similar footing. But that's great. We love conversions.
And to double click on that, and another plug, Thursday, yes. And more so than that, I think the easiest time to really set yourself up for business when you're opening the business, right? So during a startup, but if you already got a going concern, and we don't have to over-engineer also, right? Like you can have an LLC with 100 members. If you think that that's going to be enough, just invite folks into membership, right? I mean, like you don't need to overcomplicate it as well. Sometimes we are structure nerds here at BRED, but like ultimately, and specifically me, but sometimes it's easier to just use the tool you already got and just change it up just a teeny tiny bit to answer the question. So Cynthia asked, a question pertaining to housing co-ops, namely, like what one does when abuses of power imbalances within a co-op pop up. This is a great question. I was involved in a housing co-op where this happened, and it culminated to the point where I was forced to leave the co-op for personal safety. So I want to take this to start, but like I'd open this up to other folks too, is like, it doesn't matter what type of business you're in, and I will call a housing co-op a quasi business. It's like a weird hybrid of a business, but like conflict's gonna rise up. Conflict is gonna be there no matter what you do. So your structure, when you're talking about a cooperative versus a condo versus a apartment building versus single family, like really I think what is beneficial about the cooperative is that you do have equal voices, that you can actually express that power on the board. The drawback is that the other person does as well. So ultimately I think like conflict resolution is something that we really work on pretty hard in most of our co-op TA work, because that is sort of one of the most important pieces to get right in order to actually form the culture, not the structure, the culture of the organization. And resetting that culture is hard for any business. It doesn't matter if you're big or small, like resetting culture is always the hardest thing. So I would say that like there is no silver bullet with structure, apart from just understanding that conflict resolution is a muscle that you just need to flex and work out often. And again, the structure of a co-op helps, but it's not the silver bullet for conflict resolution. It's co-ops have conflicts all the time, and sometimes more often than not, because people are actually more bought in and more passionate about what they're up to and what they're doing. So Krista, any additions there? Just want to make sure.
Well, just that I'm really sorry. That's like a really tough situation, especially losing your housing.
Also, yeah,
I think like, I like to talk a lot about hard power and soft power. And like what co-ops try to do is get rid of as much of that hard power as possible. So like the formal hierarchies. But I think it's, as Joseph was saying, the culture, like the soft power is not something that like the structure itself can regulate, unless, I think that there's like a lot of stuff in like healing justice, and like you can try to create norms around what is um, okay or acceptable in terms of like wielding soft power, but it's hard. And yes, I definitely think that co-ops can have, it attracts a passionate group, and maybe not even passionate is the word, opinionated.
opinionated, I think is spot on, which is great. I think, which is the pros and the cons there, right? So we've got like one or two other questions here. So Sarah, trying to work through a little bit of how to Sarah, do you mind just sharing a little bit about what that question is? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There might be a lawnmower going on behind me, but basically, I don't know. I kind of rambled a bit, but I'm kind of wondering, uh I moved back into Harford County for the pandemic and everything, and but I want to, leaving this position where I'm at working at a farm store, start like an urban gardening DIY sort of co-op, kind of like anywhere between, maybe like if you've seen like a Fifth Season in there's like one in Asheville and Durham and everything, versus like an actual garden center Ace Hardware store sort of deal. Um, and so I've worn a lot of hats in a small business and everything. And I think that, moving on to starting a cooperative would be what I want to do. But how do I meet other people who are into doing this? And how do you kind of communicate, like how do you make sure where you start a business, what you're doing is going to be like a beneficial thing for your community? I just kind of rambled, but those are the two kind of things that I want to make sure.
Totally. First of all, rad, awesome. Thank you for doing that for the community. That's awesome. Second of all, I think like I want to parse these two things apart and then maybe think through them separately. And really, for the benefit of the call, it's like, starting a business is starting a business, like regardless of co-op or not, right? And then the co-op adds like a little bit of extra seasoning when it comes to figuring out governance and all that kind of stuff. But really, I think like where you're at is like just trying to make sure that you can start the business well. And so I'm going to do one more shameless plug for coopjumpstart.com, and then I'm going to not plug it anymore. But you could actually go through the business model canvas there, which will sort of help you understand what or who to look at as a member versus a customer, and then how to talk to those members versus those customers about the value proposition of the cooperative, right? And those two groups are the difference between a co-op business and a traditional business, right? So, I think starting with, hey, I want a bunch of workers as the members of this co-op, not consumers, right? And I want those workers to be the central membership. Great, what are the values to them and how do you talk to them? Versus I want the customers, which are, the community members, they look like this is what they're buying now, where they're going. And this is how we talk to them and reach out to them, right? So just separating those two things is, I would say, the only difference in startup sort of exercise for a business model canvas or for a, trying to create a business plan that you would want to think about. Christa, you want to double click there or anything? Yeah.
Nailed it.
Oh, great. All right, well, awesome. Well, cool. Any other questions? We've got a little bit more time left. I want to make sure that we're able to answer any other maybe structural questions or financing questions. Happy to go into any of it.
Oh, I had a question, although I guess it was partially answered, I guess, while talking. But one of the questions that I had is actually with, I was also looking to potentially start a co-op, but with my co-op, I know that with co-ops, a big part of it is servicing the people in your community. And our co-op is also about servicing our community, but we're actually an LGBT community and we were kind of based remotely. I was just wondering if, like, geographically speaking, if because we're a little bit more decentralized, although there is a little bit more kind of like, I guess, some kind of centralization, but for the most part, we are operating remotely. Would that be kind of any inhibition, or would there be any obstacles or trade-offs as a result of us operating remotely or anything?
So Christa, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I think that like we are all learning how to do this remote thing. You know, sort of non-consensually, we learned how to do this remote thing. I think that, you know, it really depends on like accessibility and like, are people connected? You know, are people, do they have internet? Do they have a computer that can handle all of that? I think that would be my first consideration. I think if you had asked me 15 months ago, I would have been like, wow, it's so hard to build collective or cooperative culture remotely. But I think that a lot of us have learned how to do that. I think that there's a lot of good thoughts and like strategies around building collaborative culture online or virtually at this point. Yeah, so I think it's easier now just because we were forced to do it than it would have been before.
Yeah, I might say that the culture aspect is going to be the hardest part, but there's many co-ops that exist solely virtually. I'm thinking of most consulting co-ops are pretty distributed across the country, and it just really depends on the size of your membership, right? So we've got one other question, and this sort of touches on finances that I think would be good to talk about. And it's using the example of a co-working space co-op. Would probably most closely resemble a housing co-op, right? Would members buy into an LLC and the LLC would get a mortgage for the space? Is that the basic of it? So Adam, like, great question, because it can be so many, you can structure it so many different ways. But the most basic, the most sort of like, the most basic or first principle sort of answer to that would be, who are the members? So are you talking about tenants being the members, or are you talking about the workers of the co-working space being the members, or both, right? So that would be the first thing that I would suss out. Who are your members, and what are you offering them for their membership, right? The second piece I would say is then it becomes a question of, well, how do you get financing to actually buy said co-working space, right? That's sort of the product that is on offer. And then it kind of becomes an equation of like, well, it could be the co-op itself that gets the loan, or you're absolutely right, it could be an LLC that gets the loan, and the co-op maybe owns the LLC, right? Or the members of the LLC are the co-op, that is the co-op, right? So like, I think that the point here is identify your members first, talk about their needs or understand their the value proposition to them, and then look at how to finance either buying a product or buying a building or whatever it might be in service of what the value that you're giving them, right? Yeah, Christa, any other thoughts there? I mean,
not to just overly complicate it, but I think like, this would be an example where, are all the members the same kind of members? Are all members just folks that come to use the space? Are there people who staff it? Are there like events that happen there? Is there, we didn't really get too far into like the situations where there could be multiple kinds of members, and that would be like potentially a multi-stakeholder cooperative. So it depends.
Yeah, and we're happy to work with you if you are thinking about a co-working space specifically. That is actually, we're happy to work with you there. But yeah, identifying who your members are, understanding the value for them and what their rights and responsibilities are is sort of the first step. And then the second step is really making sure there's a business plan, making sure that the space can actually make enough money to survive. And then the next piece is how to finance it, right? Is it again, a mortgage against the building that's tied to one entity versus another, like all that stuff we can work through. But really the key consideration is who's the member. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and unless there's anything else, we're right at time. So thank you, thank you. Again, our information here, I'm going to share this one more time. We are able to be reached here at baltimoreroundtable.org or info@baltimoreroundtable.org. Please feel free to reach out if you have a co-op project, social enterprise that you're wanting to understand how to get either access to capital or technical assistance, as well as we're going to be doing another one of these webinars next Thursday for conversions. Please do share out with everybody else. And we're also in June going to be doing our first in-person event at the Why Not lot, which information about that will be coming out in the next week or so. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yay. All right.